Some knocks are more than just sound, they're invitations. And she always knows exactly how to answer. The knock came almost instinctively, light but deliberate, as if it had a rhythm that only he could hear. Standing on the bright, sunlit porch, the 23-year-old man felt a familiar tightening in his chest, a mix of anticipation and hesitation. He had seen her before in passing, had glimpsed the 40-year-old American Caucasian woman from across the street, but today was different. There was an unspoken understanding that lingered between them, an invisible thread tugging gently at his curiosity. She was a vision of graceful composure, long black hair cascading over her shoulders, lightly tanned skin glowing in the morning light, subtle freckles scattered across her cheekbones, and soft laugh lines that hinted at a life lived fully yet tenderly. Her curvy figure held a natural elegance, the kind of presence that made ordinary rooms feel warmer, more intimate. The door opened before he could apologize or explain himself. Her dark brown eyes met his, warm and attentive, and a quiet smile curled her lips. "You always know when to knock," she said, her voice calm but edged with amusement, carrying both familiarity and a gentle tease. The statement wasn't merely about timing, it was about recognition, an acknowledgement of unspoken patterns and mutual understanding. Even standing there in the doorway, she radiated a quiet authority tempered by approachable warmth, a balance that made him feel both at ease and alive with tension. The sunlight streaming through the open doorway lit her long black hair in soft highlights and accentuated the curve of her posture, showing a woman confident in herself yet capable of subtle vulnerability. He noticed how her lightly tanned skin seemed to reflect the golden light, the faint freckles and soft smile lines giving her a human, relatable beauty that drew him in. Every detail, the tilt of her head, the slight shift in her weight, the graceful positioning of her hands resting lightly on the doorframe, was imbued with subtle intention, conveying more than words ever could. A moment stretched between them, pregnant with quiet curiosity and a restrained energy that bordered on flirtation. He felt the rhythm of his own heartbeat, quickening in response to her attention, aware of the cool metal of the doorknob beneath his hand, the faint scent of morning air mingling with something uniquely her. His hesitation met her calmness, creating a tension that was neither confrontational nor overt, simply a delicate acknowledgement of connection. Stepping slightly forward, he let his gaze wander to the small details of the hallway behind her, the sunlight pooling across the floor, the soft hum of the neighborhood outside, the quiet intimacy of a space made personal and inviting. Her presence made the ordinary feel charged with meaning. In that moment, the knock had been more than a sound, it was an entrance into a space both literal and emotional, a first brush with a connection that promised laughter, conversation, and perhaps a quiet, unspoken bond. By the time he finally spoke, it was with measured calm, but his voice betrayed the thrill he felt inside. And she, poised and self-assured, met it with the ease of someone who already knew, in some way, exactly when the next knock would come. Stepping past the threshold, the 23-year-old man felt the warmth of the bright, sunlit apartment wash over him. The widow's presence filled the space almost immediately, not in a dominating way, but in a way that drew attention effortlessly. She was 40 years old, an American Caucasian woman, with long black hair cascading over her shoulders, lightly tanned skin that seemed to glow in the morning sunlight, subtle freckles dotting her cheeks, and soft laugh lines that framed a gentle, approachable smile. Her curvy figure moved with quiet elegance, her posture natural yet undeniably graceful. She gestured toward the living room with a casual poise, fingers lightly brushing the frame of a sunlit doorway, inviting him in without words. As he followed her inside, the conversation began almost naturally, like the turning of a page that had been waiting for them both. Her voice carried warmth and attentiveness, laced with a light teasing undertone that made his chest tighten in a way he hadn't expected. Every word felt measured, yet spontaneous, and every glance held a quiet intensity. When handing over a small stack of documents, their fingers brushed briefly, a fleeting contact that sent a subtle spark through the air. Her dark brown eyes met his, steady and observing, with just the faintest hint of curiosity that made him acutely aware of the space between them. The apartment itself seemed to play a role in the moment. Sunlight poured through large windows, reflecting off light-colored walls and highlighting the tidy, lived-in comfort of the space. A small vase of flowers caught the light on a side table, and the soft hum of a distant lawn mower outside added an almost cinematic backdrop to their quiet interaction. Every subtle movement, her shoulders tilting slightly as she leaned in to examine the documents, the gentle sway of her long hair, the way she shifted her weight from one foot to the other, was charged with unspoken communication. The tension was not in grand gestures, but in the small, deliberate, and human details, the brush of fingertips, the shared smile over a minor joke, the way she caught his gaze and held it just a second too long. He found himself noting everything, aware of the subtle cadence of her voice, the way her dark brown eyes softened when she laughed, the way her hand lingered near his as she rearranged the papers. There was a rhythm forming, almost imperceptible, that blended attention, teasing, and quiet trust. He was conscious of the tiny shifts in her expression, the slight raise of her eyebrows, the curve of her lips, the way her eyes followed his hands. Each small action spoke volumes without needing words, conveying interest, warmth, and an openness he hadn't anticipated encountering so early in the day. By the time he realized it, the initial hesitation that had marked the doorstep had melted into something different, a comfortable curiosity, a spark of attraction tempered by respect, and a quiet eagerness to linger. Her casual elegance, her subtle flirtation, and the bright, airy environment combined to create a moment that was as light as morning sunlight but as heavy with promise as the unspoken understanding between two people on the brink of a slow, meaningful connection. The first exchange wasn't dramatic, it didn't need to be. Its power lay in restraint, observation, and the quiet intimacy of shared presence. A small mishap broke the rhythm of their quiet conversation, and it came without warning. A pen rolled off the edge of the counter, clattering onto the sunlit floor. The 23-year-old man bent quickly to pick it up, and in that brief motion, their hands brushed. The touch was fleeting but electric, and the air between them seemed to shiver with a subtle acknowledgement of connection. The 40-year-old American Caucasian woman looked at him, her dark brown eyes glinting with amusement, long black hair catching the sunlight as it fell across her lightly tanned face. A soft, melodic laugh escaped her lips, delicate yet vibrant, and it filled the bright kitchen with warmth. He couldn't help but laugh too, a little awkwardly at first, then more freely as the tension of anticipation eased into something lighter, something human. The sound of her laughter was more than just amusement, it was a signal of openness, a gentle invitation into shared space and experience. Her subtle freckles, the soft smile lines framing her mouth, and the curve of her shoulders as she leaned slightly forward made the moment feel intimate without being overt. She wore a fitted blouse and dark jeans, and even in this ordinary interaction, her presence seemed to transform the room, infusing it with light and a quiet, playful energy. As they straightened, their eyes met again, and something unspoken passed between them. The laughter had broken the ice, yes, but it had also amplified a new awareness, an awareness of how naturally they fit in each other's presence. Every gesture now carried weight, the casual tilt of her head, the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the way her hand rested lightly on the countertop near his. Even the smallest movement seemed intentional, deliberate in its subtlety, designed to draw his attention without demanding it. The 23-year-old man felt a rush of warmth in his chest, a flutter that was equal parts surprise and delight. He noticed the way the sunlight highlighted the gentle contours of her face, the glow of her lightly tanned skin, the elegant fall of her long black hair, and how her curvy figure seemed to relax in shared amusement. Her soft laugh lines, the faint curve of her lips and that lingering smile, conveyed an ease and authenticity that was magnetic. It was a moment of connection built entirely on spontaneity and honesty, unforced but undeniably charged with potential. For a brief stretch, the world outside the bright kitchen seemed to fade. The sunlight streaming in reflected off the polished counter, glinting like tiny sparks that mirrored the subtle electricity between them. In that space, humor became a bridge, a way to share emotion without words. The laughter lingered in the corners of the room, a gentle hum that underlined the growing comfort, curiosity, and attraction. Their shared amusement had set the stage for something deeper, a slow-burn connection, built from fleeting touches, stolen glances, and the unspoken promise of further understanding. By the time the moment settled, a quiet tension remained, not uncomfortable, but anticipatory. The laughter had been a catalyst, the spark that hinted at what might unfold next. Both were acutely aware of the magnetic pull, the delicate dance of attention, attraction, and emotional proximity. And for the first time, the 23-year-old realized that this simple, sunlit morning might mark the beginning of something profoundly, quietly intimate. The conversation had settled into a rhythm, a gentle ebb and flow that felt familiar even in its novelty. The 23-year-old man noticed it first in the way she leaned slightly closer as she explained a detail about the papers they were reviewing, her dark brown eyes lingering on his a moment longer than necessary. The 40-year-old American Caucasian woman, with her long black hair falling over her shoulders in soft waves, lightly tanned skin catching the sunlight, subtle freckles dancing across her cheeks, and soft laugh lines framing a warm, approachable smile, moved with natural elegance. Her curvy figure maintained a graceful posture, and every tilt of her head or shift in weight seemed deliberate yet effortlessly casual. The air between them carried a quiet tension, an unspoken acknowledgement of the spark that neither dared to name aloud. As he reached for a folder, their hands brushed again, lightly, almost accidentally, but enough to send a subtle ripple through the space. He felt the warmth of her skin against his, noticed the slight catch of her breath, and became acutely aware of the closeness, the gentle energy humming in that small, shared moment. The apartment was bathed in bright afternoon light, sunlight pouring through large windows and casting soft shadows across the polished wooden floors. The brightness accentuated her features, highlighting the glimmer in her dark brown eyes, the curve of her shoulders, and the natural sway of her long black hair. Every movement, from the way she adjusted a pen on the counter to the subtle glance she gave him when speaking, was imbued with intention and restraint. Their dialogue had taken on a lighter, more personal tone. She asked questions that revealed glimpses of her past, her preferences, and small quirks of personality. In response, he found himself opening up, sharing stories he rarely voiced. Each revelation brought them closer, not through grand gestures, but through shared understanding, laughter, and the tactile intimacy of proximity. When they reached for the same item, their fingers lingered briefly, brushing in a way that was charged yet entirely appropriate. The contact spoke volumes: trust, curiosity, attraction, all conveyed in the subtlest of touches. There were moments when silence fell, not awkwardly, but comfortably. He noticed the way her gaze softened during these pauses, how her dark brown eyes seemed to assess and acknowledge, yet never press. The sunlight illuminated the faint freckles along her cheekbones and the soft laugh lines around her eyes, enhancing her mature beauty and quiet confidence. He became aware of his own heartbeat, the tension in his chest, and the delicate flutter of anticipation that rose every time their proximity tightened or their hands nearly met. By the end of their exchange, the quiet flirtation had evolved into a delicate dance, a balance of restraint and subtle provocation, of casual gestures loaded with meaning. She smiled faintly as she handed him a pen, fingers brushing against his with a deliberate lightness, and he returned the gesture with an awareness that was both thrilling and grounding. Every look, every touch, every shared laugh had built a layer of intimacy that was unspoken but undeniable, creating a foundation for the emotional depth that was only beginning to unfold. In this bright, ordinary apartment, ordinary moments became extraordinary, filled with tension, connection, and the unspoken promise of more. The air had softened, settling into a quiet intimacy that was both comforting and charged. The 23-year-old man noticed the small shifts in her demeanor, a slight slump of the shoulders, a brief hesitation before she spoke, the gentle fold of her hands in front of her, that hinted at a vulnerability beneath her confident exterior. The 40-year-old American Caucasian woman, with her long black hair catching the afternoon light, lightly tanned skin warm and inviting, subtle freckles adding depth to her features, and soft laugh lines that framed a tentative, almost shy smile, radiated a complexity that drew him in. Her curvy figure held its graceful posture, yet in these small moments of openness, the strength and elegance coexisted seamlessly with fragility. They had moved to the living room, sitting across from each other on sunlit armchairs that faced a large window. The golden light spilled across the room, illuminating the subtle details of her presence, the gentle curve of her neck, the faint shine of her hair, the warmth of her skin. He became aware of the rhythmic rise and fall of her breathing, the way her dark brown eyes flicked to his and then quickly away, a dance of attention and retreat that spoke of hesitation and self-protection. She was revealing herself carefully, testing the waters of trust, and every subtle movement, every glance, seemed deliberate, an invitation without demand. He leaned slightly forward, hands loosely resting on his knees, aware of the tension that was building in these quiet moments. When she shared a memory, brief, almost passing, there was a flicker of emotion in her eyes that caught him off guard. It was not dramatic, not overt, but the subtle vulnerability in her tone and expression was magnetic. He felt an urge to reach out, to offer reassurance without words, and in that fleeting thought, their proximity seemed charged with possibility. His hand brushed against the arm of the chair as if by accident, yet he noticed her shoulders relax slightly, the briefest acknowledgement of comfort. The apartment was bright, yet intimate, the sunlight softened the edges of the room, creating a gentle warmth that mirrored the emotional atmosphere. A faint scent of coffee lingered in the air, mingling with the delicate perfume she wore, something understated yet comforting. Each detail became amplified, the curve of her lips as she laughed softly at a shared joke, the subtle gesture of brushing hair behind her ear, the way she shifted in her seat when a quiet silence stretched between them. Every movement was loaded with meaning, a careful balance of honesty and self-protection. He realized then that this moment of vulnerability was as potent as any gesture of flirtation. The quiet courage she displayed in opening a window into her inner world made the room feel charged, alive with unspoken connection. He mirrored her subtly, allowing his own expressions and movements to convey attentiveness and understanding, creating a rhythm of interaction that was gentle, respectful, and deeply intimate. By the time they both leaned back slightly, a comfortable silence enveloped them, warm and reassuring. The subtle vulnerability she had shown had not weakened her, it had deepened the connection between them, layering trust, curiosity, and anticipation in ways that words alone could not capture. In the bright glow of the room, their shared presence became a language of its own, delicate, emotional, and profoundly magnetic. The air between them had shifted imperceptibly, a subtle tightening of attention, a quiet electricity that pulsed beneath the bright morning light streaming through the apartment windows. The 23-year-old man felt it first in the quickened rhythm of his heartbeat, the way his chest seemed to expand and contract with heightened awareness. The 40-year-old American Caucasian woman sat across from him, long black hair falling in soft waves over her lightly tanned shoulders, dark brown eyes luminous with emotion, and subtle freckles adding warmth and humanity to her expressive features. Her soft laugh lines, usually framing a gentle smile, were slightly taut, hinting at a tension that matched his own. Her curvy figure remained poised and elegant, yet the shift in her posture, a small lean forward, an attentive tilt of her head, signaled a vulnerability and anticipation that made the room feel suspended in a delicate balance. They had moved closer, not intentionally, but each subtle shift of position brought them into a magnetic proximity that neither could ignore. The sunlight reflected off the polished wood floors, catching the strands of her hair and casting a soft glow over the space between them. His fingers brushed against a notebook as he reached for a pen, and she, adjusting her sleeve, allowed her hand to hover almost imperceptibly near his own. The fleeting contact sent a jolt through the tension-laden air, a silent acknowledgement of the unspoken desire threading between them. Their conversation had slowed, punctuated by long, meaningful pauses. Words were less important now than the charged silence that framed their interaction. He noticed the micro-expressions, the subtle rise of her eyebrows, the gentle parting of her lips, the way her eyes softened yet lingered on him with unspoken curiosity. He could feel the warmth radiating from her, the human intimacy of shared space amplified by quiet anticipation. Each glance, each breath, each movement became layered with unspoken meaning. The bright apartment, with sunlight spilling over every surface, felt like a cocoon of private tension, shielding them from the world outside. When he spoke, his voice was measured, carrying a sincerity that seemed to resonate with her own quiet restraint. She responded, her tone equally calm, yet there was an underlying charge, a subtle flirtation wrapped in gentleness. The tension rose and fell, ebbing like a tide, as they navigated the delicate space between familiarity and desire. A brief smile crossed her face, but it was not merely playful, it carried a weight, a silent question of boundaries, intentions, and shared understanding. At that moment, he realized the connection was no longer simple curiosity or amusement. It had transformed into something more profound, a careful interplay of trust, emotional intimacy, and restrained desire. Every subtle touch, every lingering glance, every brush of movement reinforced the electric tension that hummed between them. The bright sunlight illuminated the intensity of their closeness, highlighting the warmth of her skin, the elegance of her posture, and the depth in her dark brown eyes. As the silence stretched, neither moved to break it, both acutely aware of the emotional precipice they teetered on. The tension had reached its peak, simultaneously thrilling and daunting, leaving them suspended in a moment that demanded attention, awareness, and restraint. In that luminous, ordinary apartment, the extraordinary had begun to take root. The room seemed to exhale alongside them, the tension that had hung in the bright apartment slowly melting into a gentle warmth. The 23-year-old man noticed it first in the softening of her posture. The 40-year-old American Caucasian woman, long black hair framing her lightly tanned face, dark brown eyes now calm and luminous, and subtle freckles that caught the sunlight like tiny constellations. Her curvy figure, previously poised with anticipation, relaxed into the chair's embrace, the faint smile lines around her eyes deepening as she allowed herself a moment of unguarded ease. There was a quiet, understated beauty in the way she leaned slightly forward, her hands resting naturally on her lap, open and inviting, conveying comfort and trust. The conversation had shifted, no longer layered with pauses of restraint or subtle flirtation. Instead, they shared simple exchanges, observations about the day, light-hearted commentary about small events, and laughter that was free, unforced, and genuine. Every word, every glance, every gentle nod felt like a thread weaving them closer together. When he reached to adjust a cushion or handed her a folder, their hands brushed, and this time, the touch was met with a deliberate, mutual acknowledgement, a quiet confirmation of closeness without urgency, a warm affirmation of the emotional intimacy that had grown between them. The apartment itself seemed to mirror their mood. Sunlight poured through the windows, highlighting the soft textures of the furniture, the polished surfaces of the floor, and the small vase of fresh flowers on the side table. Even ordinary details, the faint hum of a ceiling fan, the gentle rustle of leaves outside, seemed part of their shared moment, framing it with a serene sense of normalcy and comfort. The brightness of the environment contrasted with the depth of emotion they shared, reinforcing that this connection was not a fleeting spark but something grounded, human, and enduring. At one point, her dark brown eyes met his with a warmth that was no longer tentative but fully present. A subtle smile tugged at the corners of her lips, and her fingers brushed lightly against a notebook he had set down. It was a touch that carried acknowledgement, understanding, and a quiet intimacy. He felt the flutter of contentment in his chest, the grounding presence of mutual respect and trust, and the steady assurance that this connection had moved beyond mere curiosity or playful tension. In these small, shared gestures, the laughter, the casual touches, the lingering glances, they found a rhythm that was unspoken yet deeply understood. The emotional arc of their encounter had completed itself, initial hesitation, growing curiosity, quiet flirtation, moments of vulnerability, tension, and finally, resolution. Each step had been subtle, layered, and deliberate, creating a slow-burn intimacy that felt real, relatable, and profoundly human. As the sunlight shifted across the room, casting warm highlights on her lightly tanned skin and long black hair, he realized that the moment was not about urgency or dramatic declarations, it was about connection, presence, and shared humanity. The room held a serene quiet, an understanding that this bond, built from small gestures and subtle exchanges, was both delicate and enduring. The finality of this resolution was not about ending, but about acknowledgement, a slow, steady, and emotionally satisfying closeness that promised the possibility of more, grounded in trust, warmth, and respect.